You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com. I have to admit, as I kick off this show, one of the hardest things that I have to do each and every week is figure out what the hell I'm going to talk about on Sox in the Basement.
It's gotten impossible.
I was just at an event for one of my other podcasts, and somebody asked me, "You make a living off of this?" I said, "Yeah, I've been doing this now for about 6 years. I've got this network. I'm really proud of it." The person I was talking to was in PR but got their start in radio. And they were like, "That's awesome." They're like, "What other ones do you have?" So I have Sox in the Basement. Right away, she was like, "I've heard of that. That's a pretty big podcast." I said, "It is." I have no idea what to talk about though right now. She's like, "I feel so bad for you." Because the problem is, I'm inexplicably tied to this team run by this old miser who's nothing but a failure after 40 years of owning the White Sox. I don't care about his basketball. Jerry Reinsdorf is a failure in the world of baseball. 40 years. He bought the team for pretty much about the same amount of money as the Tribune Company bought the Cubs for at around the same time. And look at the difference in the value of those franchises. Look at how little he makes it to the postseason. Even when he won the World Series, he had the 13th highest payroll in baseball. He wasn't really trying. Lightning was caught in a bottle. And we were all beneficial of that. But Paul Konerko should ask for that ball back that he gave him at the end, because that old man didn't deserve it. And he doesn't deserve a major league franchise. And so we sit here and we try to figure out, like, well, what are we going to talk about? I could spend another half hour yelling about how Jerry's terrible. But at this point, anybody with a rational thought in their head already knows he's terrible. Like these people that get online try to tell me that somehow it's Kenny's fault, or it's Rick Hahn's fault, or it's the player's fault. I always just respond back simply, who pays all of those people? Who kept them around? Who keeps the people in place that run the team internally? Who employs the person who employs John Schriffen? Why did they ever get rid of Nancy Faust? I have a million questions.
And there are no answers.
It all starts at the top with that guy. So until he's dead or sells the team, like my father, having a couple of beers at the lake, we were up there for Labor Day weekend. He told me maybe he'll sell the team. Maybe he'll be so tired of this that he'll put the team up for sale in the offseason. Like this is my poor dad clinging to hope. There's no hope, Dad. He's not selling the team. He's taking it to the grave with him. But he's hopefully going to be there soon. He's not going to be one of those guys. I've looked at him. He is not Virginia McCaskey. He carries too much weight. He toddles around. 5 years, maybe. 5 years. Unfortunately, we all have to live through that 5 years. We all have to take care of ourselves, so we're nice and we're healthy. We're ready to return when whoever takes over this team does better. And anybody could take over this team and do better. But I'm not going to spend a half hour yelling about him. And I could talk about the ballpark experience, because I know a lot of people are focusing on that right now, Ed, because it's like, well, we're at the game. Let's see whether or not they break the record for losses, and that's all fine and good. But to me, the ballpark experience, if I'm going to a game right now, and I am going to one more because I got free tickets because my kid got straight A's. So I'm going to a Sunday against the Oakland A's. It may be one of their only victories that they get for the remainder of the month, for the remainder of the season. But my plan is to go to Cork and Carry at the park at 33rd and Princeton with my little guy who's 9 years old, and I'm going to feed him lunch there because I'm not spending money with Jerry. I'm not buying Jerry's beer. I'm not buying a sandwich for him, and it ends up with Jerry. I'm taking my free tickets. I'm gonna take him to a game. We'll watch some of it. He'll probably just go play up in the kids zone because it's not very much to watch on the field. I might come walking in the third inning, because I'd rather experience the outdoor seating and the fall colors right there along 33rd and Princeton at Cork and Carry at the park, have a libation, talk with other Sox fans. Like right now, if I'm a Sox fan and I'm living in that neighborhood, I'm not going into that ballpark unless I've already bought the tickets in advance. I'm not going up to the window and buying anything. I'd rather sit at a place like Cork, spend my money there, and then critique the team with other Sox fans. I think that would be more fun. And I wouldn't be in the ballpark. I don't think it's better at the ballpark. I think it's better at the Cork or any of the other places that are in that area than going into that place. So now I'm thinking, what do we talk about for now 25 more minutes? And I feel like I have to back up my anger by explaining what I would do if suddenly I was thrust into Chris Getz's role this offseason. Somehow, the keys are handed to me. Jerry Reinsdorf calls on the phone after listening to this episode and goes, okay, smartass, I'm going to let you run it. And my first question to him would be, do I get to keep any money I take off the books? Because if you don't let me do that, if you don't let me take money off and then re-add it someplace else, this is an effort in futility. There's no reason to even field a team in 2025. That would be my first thing I would say to him. So I'll ask you, Ed, do you think that Jerry Reinsdorf will give 80% of what comes off the books with Jimenez and Moncada and Clevenger and these other names that you're going to be able to jettison off of the payroll? Do you think he at least gives you 80% of that this offseason if you're Chris Getz?
Well, it depends on if Jerry Reinsdorf is really the smart businessman that he claims to be or if he's not, because he cannot take another year of this. And if you do not give Chris Getz some money to spend, there's just not enough talent in the organization as it sits to make up for anybody walking out the door. You're not going to get better by what's coming up behind everybody in the minor leagues. There's what, Edgar Caro.
And that's it. That's all that's coming next year. Colson Montgomery is not coming next year, folks. He's stalled in the minors. He's got well over 400 at-bats. He's hitting 206. He has tripled the amount of strikeouts that he gets in a season. I mean, I was looking at this. If you look at him last year across 3 different levels, he strikes out 56 times and he has 56 walks. This year, he's got 59 walks and 140 strikeouts in a bandbox in AAA in Charlotte. And he's hitting 206 with a 692 OPS. Guess what? He is not Corey Seager reborn. And I don't know if he's ever getting up here and when he does, what he's going to be. He's a stalled prospect at the one time you didn't need that to happen to your team. Chris Getz must be pulling his hair out. But then again, he was in charge of minor league development. So sorry.
Yeah, well, and that's part of the problem here too, is that, let's talk about the prospects that they have. Just going by the amount of at-bats that you had in AAA Charlotte this year, Colson Montgomery, 413 at-bats, 489 plate appearances. Zach DeLoach is the next highest, and he's got a 287 batting average, but only a 785 OPS. So maybe Zach DeLoach.
That's why he's up and Montgomery's not up, because he at least did something. You know they wanted Montgomery up, but they can't even justify it. No,
but even Zach DeLoach still has, a good solid 25 to 27% strikeout rate, which means that much like Oscar Colas, he's going to struggle. And you're going to have guys, Colas, 250, 736 OPS, not what he was supposed to be. But then you start getting into guys like Mark Payton, who's 32 years old. I'm sorry, Mark Payton is not the answer to anybody's question ever. Wilmer Defoe is sitting down there. He's 32 years old. You have Brian Ramos, who we've already seen the Brian Ramos show. You've got 33-year-old Rafael Ortega taking at-bats, 29-year-old Chucky Robinson. We've seen the Chucky Robinson show.
These are the highest at-bats right now in the minors.
Yeah, Charlotte is basically a repository for quad A guys, okay, and replacement bodies. They're not replacement level. They're just replacement humans. They're, it's I don't even want to call them baseball players at this point, because some of them I'm not sure are.
They're replacement humans. That's what they are. Well, and that's the thing. There's no hitting down there. That's the biggest thing with this team.
Even in Double A, it's not great. You've got, there you've got young guys, but none of them are really excelling. The best you're going to find is Tim Elko.
Again, he's in Double A though.
Yeah, Double A. At 289, 258, he's also 25-year-old at Double A, which means that he's a bit of a stalled prospect. He's a little over age for what you get down there. So he can kind of do a little dominance, but even right above him in terms of plate appearances, a guy named Jason Matthews, who's 27 years old. It's not like the minor league system has a bunch of young guys with endless potential that we're sitting there saying, hey, let the young guys play. Because if let the young guys play means bringing 32-year-old Mark Payton to play outfield for you, that's not doing anything. That just doesn't move the needle. So Chris Getz is going to have some resources, because if nothing else, even if all that he can do is find 9 replacement level guys and Edgar Caro to flesh out the position players and the DH position, that's still an improvement over what he's had this year.
And you can improve the quality of life for your loved ones and yourself. Switch to a new age of life with Hyatt Home Medical Equipment. Keep mom and dad, grandma and grandpa out of assisted living. It's all about living independently, and you can make it so they can get around on their own and do just that. Stair lifts, ramps, grab bars, lift chairs, and even bathroom remodeling. Hyatt's going to work with your insurance. They have 0% financing for qualified individuals, and they're also going to help you out with the CPAP machines. You might be on one of those. Had a buddy of mine visit me a couple of weeks ago, got a hotel room because he was embarrassed by how loud his CPAP machine was. I told him, Hyatt Home Medical Equipment's got the latest and greatest, man. It doesn't have to be that way. Switch now, get supplies directly mailed to you, test it all out in their showroom, continuous glucose monitors, and anything else you can think of at Hyatt Home Medical Equipment. Learn more about them at hhme.com. Let's look at what Chris Getz has right now going into the offseason. First off, he has a minor league system that is pitching heavy. He does not have a lot of young hitters that are coming here anytime soon. Prospect heads would tell you, look at this guy, but that guy's 18. Look at this guy, he's in single A. He has nothing really coming with the exception of Edgar Caro, and if suddenly somebody flips a switch on the back of Colson Montgomery, which right now I don't have any faith in. So that's all he has down there. When you look at the major league level, I accept looking at just the players on the field, not the pitchers, that next year Caro and Lee are behind the plate, and I would take Gavin Sheets and make him my first baseman, and I would use Andrew Vaughn and his multi-years of control and the fact that teams look at White Sox players and think to themselves, if I get them out of there, I can make them better, and hope there's something there that you can get back for moving on from a replacement level Andrew Vaughn, because you don't need them both. You have nothing at second, nothing at short, nothing at third. And before you start naming off guys that you think are the future over at that position, tell me then what the difference is between Danny Mendick and Lenin Sosa and Brooks Baldwin and Nicky Lopez and Miguel Vargas and Brian Ramos. Because all I have to do is bring up the total aggregate stats of all these players, and they all just sit at the bottom with each other. I got 216, 197, 214, 196, 122 on the year. Those are batting averages of professional baseball players. These are all the names you were going to throw at me when I said you have nothing in the middle of your infield. You have nothing over at third base. Nicky Lopez could not start on pretty much any other Major League Baseball team except for the White Sox, but he's able to get away with a 235 average and a 593 OPS and play every day because of how bad you are. You have nothing there. You have Luis Robert Jr. standing out in the outfield that you hope plays up to $15 million a year next year, or you may not even pick up his $20 million option the year after that if he plays like this again. You've got Andrew Benintendi, who you're hoping continues what he's been doing over the last month or so throughout the end of the season. Maybe somebody will say, well, get him out of there. Lift a little bit of money out of the way. Maybe you can do a little bit more. And you got nothing else out there. Like Dominic Fletcher looks like a nice defensive player, but I don't see him hitting. So essentially what I have is a replacement level first baseman, a nice catching prospect coming up with a guy who would be okay as his backup, but nothing special. Has the ability to develop. I still believe Corey Lee is a professional baseball player. I got Luis Robert Jr., who knows what the hell's going on with him, and I got Andrew Benintendi. Other than that, I got nothing. I got nothing on this team. That's all the holes that are there. And when I look down the minor leagues, the highest ranked prospect hit 206 this year. So that's what they are. When I look at their pitching staff, it's different, Ed. When I look at their pitching staff, I can put together a five starters right now. I can sit there and say, okay, we're going to take Crochet. Let's just assume that he's going to be back. Drew Thorpe is going to be out there. At the bottom part of my rotation, definitely Davis Martin is going to be there. Jonathan Cannon can get another shot. Sitting down there, at least in the 5 spot, I'd like to see him develop. And then Iriarte, who just got up here, he maybe gets a chance to start next year. And then Hagen Smith and Noah Schultz probably show up in the halfway point of the season. And then there's all these other guys that are ranked on all these prospect lists in the top 10, top 15 that are all arms down there. And they are probably pieces you have to move. If I'm Chris Getz, like I said earlier, and I have to figure out what I'm going to do, I'm probably trying to move some of that young pitching, which is going to drive prospect heads nuts. But I'm trying to move that to find a bat that I can have control over because I have no bats. I'm looking for anything I can to fill my infield first and foremost.
Well, and you're only allowed to use the resources that you have, right? So if you've got an excess of pitching and you need to find some position players, well, there's no, I don't care what the philosophy is about hoarding young pitchers. If you're really good at it, let's say Brian Bannister really is onto something, then that means that you can do what the Dodgers do, okay? Where you take guys with obvious flaws and you bring them in and you fix them. You find a way to maximize their strengths and minimize their weaknesses. That's how you end up with Nick Nastrini here. That's how you end up with Jordan Leisure here.
All we got is pitching. I don't know who's swinging the bat, and that's why you're going to break a record this year.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, is Chris Flexen so terrible that you have a major league record amount of losses in his starts this year? They've lost over 20 of his starts in a row at this point because they lost his last start. So that is, I mean, that is a new record. That's a new record for futility for a guy who is, not good by any stretch of the imagination. But I mean, you got to be able over the course of 20 starts to run into something, right? You got to be able to get into a game where, you win a slugfest 9-6 and the guy picks up a win or at least doesn't get the loss, or the team doesn't get the loss.
Think of that stat too. And he had a 1.1 B WAR. Like that little bit, slightly above replacement level so far this year, Chris Flexen. And he couldn't get a win.
No, it's not even about him getting a win. The team didn't get a win. It's impossible to quantify just how futile the lineup on this team has been. I mean, I look at hitting around the league. I mean, pick a lousy team, right? Pick a team that just absolutely sucks that isn't the White Sox. And you're going to find at least a couple of guys that you sit there and go, well, at least they got that guy. At least that guy's taken care of. I mean, I look at the Washington Nationals, okay? Luis Garcia, their primary second baseman, is hitting .290 with a .779 OPS. He's got a little bit of a platoon issue, but frankly, that's pretty decently good. I mean, that's a round replacement, if not slightly above. CJ Abrams has at least a 244 and 744 average. I mean, that's a middle infield that you can live with to a certain degree because they also each have over 20 stolen bases. They each have double digits in homers, and those are your little speed guys going on there. But they have some guys that actually play the game. James Woods came up, is hitting .273 with a .782 OPS. Juan Yepez, a guy that they just pulled off the scrap heap from the Cardinals, is hitting .282 with a .782 OPS. You would take all of this, but we don't have, as the White Sox, we're not watching anybody do any of that. We're not watching anybody do anything that resembles remotely what other teams, even in their inability to play this game on a regular basis or play it well, are able to put together. Even Andrew Vaughn, even the guy that you're sitting here saying is probably representing one of their better trade chips going into the offseason as far as position players, I mean, his numbers are just not good enough.
They're not, but somebody will fall for it. Come on. Give me a little bit of hope. Give me a glimmer of it. Because I'm telling you right now, teams look at the White Sox and they go, if we can just get this guy off the team, he's going to be better. And we don't have to pay that much, so we get him at kind of a value. Because other teams out there are smart. We're stupid. There's a lot of smart baseball teams out there. Somebody will come a knocking. Here's the thing that I look at. Is there anything we can do to just be a professional baseball team next year, right? Like, I know it's crazy.
Yes.
I know people will sit there and say, Chris, they're not going to spend any money. They're in a rebuild, which if this is a rebuild, we're in a lot of trouble, folks, because there's a lot less coming than what was supposedly coming in the last rebuild. They don't have enough to go out and continue to stock that minor leagues. Maybe they trade Crochet. Maybe they do. Maybe that's what they do. Maybe they trade Crochet, and trading Crochet brings them back some position players that'll play in the infield and will be able to produce with a bat. And then if that happens, I think I'll be able to stomach it. That's the only return I'm taking for him, though. If you give me a bunch of pitchers again, I'm going to say, well, I just don't understand what you're doing. You have to bring back players for him.
How many players does Garrett Crochet bring you, though, realistically?
Two. Here's the thing. I want quality over quantity.
Yeah, and I agree with you.
I want quality over quantity. If you're going to trade Garrett Crochet, give me back two players that I can realistically believe can walk in and start or be a part of this team in 2025. Or that I know are coming midway through the year that are close enough, that are pretty polished, that you have an abundance of. You have way too many at this position, and you need to go find yourself a Garrett Crochet. That's the team you want to go find. Like, you say the Orioles off the top of your head, but they're too stupid to make the deal because they want to hold on to every prospect. They think they can field 14 players instead of 9 a game, so they're just holding on to them. And I hope that continues to bite them in the ass, and I hope they continue to fall short in the playoffs. I hope they make it in the postseason. And the big glaring problem with the Orioles is they didn't have any shutdown starters, and they get bounced out early. That's what I want for them. I want them to continue to suffer because they hold on to all their hitting prospects and won't give any of them to me. So I'm rooting against them, and I want it to be because they don't have the pitching to do it. That's what I want. But like a team out there that has an abundance of something, and we have plenty of needs, right? So when I say an abundance of something, an abundance of middle infielders, an abundance of third basemen, an abundance of outfielders, there's a lot. You can give me a first base prospect or just a big hitter that I don't know where to put him because I don't have a DH next year because, again, I'm not keeping Sheets and Vaughn together. I'm not keeping them both. So there are teams that have players that are either blocked or that are good that would love to have a guy like Garrett Crochet coming into the next season. That's all I would accept for him if they end up doing it. Now, another thing you could do is you could take some of the money. Some of the money that's going to come off the books, you would turn around and you would reinvest it. You would do this so that maybe somebody showed up at your ballpark. You would do this so that people didn't start to think you were purposely losing, like a villain in an old 80s baseball movie. Like what? Nobody knows what this guy's doing, but he could spend some of the money. One of the more interesting names, and I looked up his market value today, and right now Spotrac has him at $12 million. Alex Verdugo would be interesting. And before everybody laughs at me, I want to direct you to a story from earlier this year, where it seems as though Alex Verdugo is allergic to his batting gloves. He goes up to the plate with hives on his hands and still plays at a professional level. His bat would play at the rate, and he would be an answer in the outfield. And somebody immediately just yelled at their podcast player, well, what about Dominic Fletcher? What about him? What has he done? Like, what has he done? You don't have an answer anywhere out there. He'd be an interesting name. Another interesting name would be Ha-Sung Kim, the middle infielder for the Padres. Another guy with a market value, according to Spotrac, of about $12 million next year. He could play second, play short. He could play third. You need somebody to play at all three of those positions. He's in a slight down year, which still has him with an OPS over 700. And I think that you need to find players like that to bring in here. And just the cost of those two players is far lower than what's coming off the books. It gives you a start. Because this idea that every single one of these players that you're hoping will bring it to another level next year, or whatever little retreads that you pick up, or even when you go and you trade and you get those major league ready prospects, not all of them are going to work out. You need a few stable players entered into your lineup. This goes back to what I always yell about with teams. Teams will sit there and say, well, look at this. I have prospects and hope and this guy here who's trying to get it back together again and a maybe over here and a possibly over here, and that fills out 8 of my 9 spots on my roster. Okay, well, 2 of those are going to work out and you're going to lose a ton of games. And so you would like to find some things you're sure of. And that's what I would like to see Chris Getz do in the offseason. Add a few pieces that are still, both those players, I think they're around 28 years old. Add a few pieces that are of reasonable age that can go stand out there and at least you don't have a question because you have too many questions. And I'm not saying you're winning the division. I'm not even saying you're 500, but I really don't want to watch this anymore. I just don't. I do not buy into the idea of the best thing for the team is to watch them lose 120 games next year too. Like, I don't buy into that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to watch that product. I don't want to watch that product, and I don't want to wait for that product to get better. It's not good enough for me. I expect more than just, well, we're just going to gather all of our money, and one day it'll be spent again. We'll hear that big lie, and nothing goes out there and plays next year either. So I think if you're Chris Getz with this owner, you're just trying to hold on to as much of what's being spent on the roster this year for next year, and you just need to start adding in professional baseball players that answer some of your questions. You could still build while doing that, but you really need to push to hold on to some of that money and put it out there because there is just no benefit to this team to go out and lose 120 games next year. Nobody's going to be watching it. I mean, is that the plan? Is he just trying to move the team? Because nobody's going to be watching this next year.
He can't, like I said at the start, he can't afford another year like this year and hope to have any fan base to come back to, because I'm not saying that White Sox fans don't have the diehard gene in them, and I'm not saying that we're a fickle bunch by any stretch of the imagination, but at some point and at some level, there's going to be just this fatigue. We have 41 years.
Oh, it's here now. It's here now. I wouldn't even be watching this team if I wasn't doing a podcast about them.
Well, and how many people have said that to you? How many people have said that to me, where it's like, I don't know how you guys watch week in and week out to come up with stuff to talk about. If Chris Getz can spend mediocre dollars on middle of the road players, you can have a team that goes 500 and is at least semi-watchable and still gets decently high draft picks. And if your scouting department's good, and if your player development is good, you can find the talent in the draft to rebuild. If your international plans are better and your money is better spent, you can rebuild the farm system with some of that. You can use some of these players that are on there to try and rebuild the farm system, but you just don't have the talent. This is not a teardown type of rebuild, because Luis Robert Jr. has yet to prove that he is the superstar we all say he is. Andrew Vaughn has yet to prove that he is a good major league first baseman. Gavin Sheets has yet to prove that. These guys are replacement or below, and they might have, in the case of Robert Jr., he might have still some potential there. You could say the injuries are holding him back, whatever. I'm not sure that he's going to have the value if you trade him, because he's been so down. But at the same time, all Chris Getz can probably hope for is to find a lineup of guys that are just basically a bunch of who's that, the glue guys, the seventh hitters on a bunch of teams from this year. He's going to have a lineup of 7 guys, right? And if they all hit replacement level for their position, honestly, the improvement is going to be, a good 120% turnaround. It's amazing.
I think you can field a team that isn't this bad pretty easily. You just have to get out of your own way. Like, there has to be an honest assessment of players at this point. Nobody from the front office has to do with public relations, who looks good in pictures, who they like to sell marketing and publicity-wise. None of those people should be allowed to speak. Jerry Reinsdorf shouldn't be able to talk. Baseball people should look at baseball players and say, okay, this is what this guy is. An honest assessment of each and every player. Stop worrying about, if you like them or not, if you're friends with them or not. I had somebody send us a message the other day. Terry reached out through soxinthebasement.com and asked the question, who do I think is the team leader in the clubhouse? And I was like, well, gosh, whoever it is should be fired, because this team is terrible. But I have noticed that, and this again goes to why I'm leaning towards Sheets, because they told me forever that it was Vaughn, but you notice the press guys always go to Sheets. The press guys are talking to him more than anybody. He's the quote. He's the guy that when Pedro is acting out of pocket, kind of explained, I think Pedro's a little nuts. He said it in enough words. We don't really agree with Pedro. He was very vocal. He's been around at least long enough. He's playing every day. He's feeling really confident about himself. If I had to guess, I would think he's one of the leaders inside of the locker room. And again, if you're playing him every day, all of a sudden he's starting to hit. I know he's streaky. I know he's 28. But right now I would take him, and I would try to see whether or not somebody wanted Andrew Vaughn, because I wouldn't keep the two of them. And I think that you have to honestly assess players now and not worry about their feelings, how long you've known them for, whether or not, they've got family they're going to have to pull out of schools. Chris Getz needs to be heartless this offseason. He has to be heartless. And I have to see more out of him than I've seen so far. I have to see trades that make sense to me and not that Fetty garbage. The only thing that's got me believing that he might be okay in his next trade is the Drew Thorpe trade. But then again, you were trading Dylan Cease, who ended up being one of the best pitchers in baseball this year. So, you really did have one hell of a chip that you traded. Remember, White Sox fans were all worried. Oh, what if this is his peak value? It's not his peak value.
Nope, it wasn't his peak value.
No, he got a lot better. He got
he did.
He got a lot better. Probably should have held on that one. This goes back to what I say all the time. Why are we always trying to trade a guy 2 years before he has to leave or 3 years before he has to leave? Why are we so defeatist as a fan base that we start buying into that garbage? Because Dylan Cease was good this year. Then again, he might have been good because he had a good team around him. So who knows? Hindsight's 20/20.
Entirely possible.
But besides that deal, I look at Chris Getz's other deals and I go, okay, nothing here makes me excited. I need to see more this offseason. I need to see heartlessness and I need to see a direction. And I need to see a guy who's going to pull the trigger on players that are going to come in here and actually be in the lineup and not in the rotation and not in the bullpen. He needs guys for his lineup. And that's the only focus this offseason. Every dollar should be spent on offense. Barfield was just on the broadcast. I know nobody's listening to the broadcast anymore because the play-by-play guy doesn't even know the game of baseball and just makes weird noises and gets excited over the stupidest things. Maybe you're listening to hear Steve Stone every once in a while make a snarky comment about something that he says, but you're not normally watching the broadcast. If you were watching it, Barfield was on and he was talking about when we need offense. When he was asked, what do we need? We need offense. And that's the whole off season. You cannot come back in the next season and tell me all these guys that did terrible over the last half of the season who are all young, we're going to give them another try. There has to be a bloodletting and there has to be a direction. There have to be moves. You have to start trading some of your capital.
Well, and here's the other thing too. If they're worried about the marketing, guess what? We're not gonna market around players because you're competing now. You're competing with Caleb Williams. You're competing with Connor Bedard. You're competing with a lot of other Chicago sports icons, and you're not doing a good enough job. I don't even know that much about Gavin Sheets to even be able to sit there and say, like, hey, I even like the guy. I just know what his stats are. I know what I see, what he does on the field. I don't know a whole lot about his personality. You don't market your players anyway, so don't even try. Don't put him on a poster. I don't care. What I want to see for marketing next year is White Sox baseball. Look, we're trying, okay?
That's it. That's the slogan. Call Brooks Boyer up right now. White Sox baseball. Look, we're trying.
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found and always on soxinthebasement.com.